So our topic for today is about the architectural heritage in the Philippines. Okay, so this comes in two parts. So the first part today, and then the next part next Friday. Okay, because it's really quite long. Even the part for today has something like 150 or more slides. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to discuss each slide. It's just that this was supposed to be part of a lecture about Philippine architecture, something that I prepared supposedly for ArtHist 4. That's why I had to remove a lot of the slides, which are more lecture, because here what we are trying to learn is that we just want ourselves to be familiar with what are the heritage structures in the Philippines and how it developed, no, from the very beginning, because we cannot assess a heritage resource if we have no idea of how it what was the historical background, no, of the surrounding area. Uh, so this is more for familiarization. There are many technical terms that we will encounter, but that is not our concern now. But still, I will showing them to you so that you'll be familiar with them. And I bet that you already, um, I'm not sure, but I think that this would be tackled in Art Hist 4. Okay, so to tell you the truth, class, when I went on study leave like 3 or 4 years ago, because I just returned last semester, so ArcHist 4 was not yet offered at that time, but we were already proposing it, and then we already drew up the draft of the curriculum. So when I was in Japan for my graduate studies, that's the time that they offered it. So I really don't know what the contents are and how it's delivered. So I used to be teaching history of architecture, but right now it's been assigned to some other people. Um, but that's why I have these slides. So architectural heritage in the Philippines. For today, we will try to achieve these following objectives: to know the development of primitive architecture in the Philippines, to know the vernacular architecture in the Philippines, and to know architecture in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period. So a lot of these slides are on the last part, no, about the Spanish colonial period. Similarly, in the part two, most of the slides will be about the American colonial period, because that's where we have so many examples. There's also a lot of examples in the Spanish colonial period. So we start with the primitive architecture in the Philippines. Okay, so you can interrupt me anytime if you have questions, uh, but then you have to speak out, no, because I cannot see you. Um, we have actually an archaeological digging in Palawan because there was a discovery of kuan. It's the discovery dates back to the Paleolithic man of the Pleistocene period. That's really way back, no? And that discovery is the woman's skull cap and a mandible, no? The jaw. And this is a picture of the excavation in Palawan. And another cave, there was also a lot of discovery, especially about dated, say um, 2680 BC. So that's way back. So Neolithic period. Because there are theories that Philippines, of course, is part of a bigger continent which is called Pangaea and which split up into different continents. Or there are other theories where the Philippines is also connected by land bridges before, um, and then the water level sort of raised. So therefore, those land bridges are now sunken. So we are at where we are now. Um, Primitive building defined is that act of building which is practiced in societies of a low technological and economic level. So mostly by the poor people. At that time, there was really no big distinction about poor or rich because there's just a novelty, which is um, it's just the novelty, and then there are the rest of the people. Um, but then at that time also, I well the primitive time, I don't even think there's a novelty, no, a nobility. So uh, really, the way that they build their shelter did not require any science. It's just more of trial and error. Um, and so what characterized their buildings are diffused knowledge, so like very really diffused. They have very little knowledge about building. And then it's more influenced by beliefs, myths, religious, and social organizations. It's therefore open to symbolic and cosmic interpretation. So many times they are motivated by something which is more spiritual or something which is more cosmic. Okay, because during that time the people, very simple, um, may easily be intimidated by force more stronger than they are, no, that they cannot defeat. So that's why they end up trying to please whatever that force is, no, so that they can get favor, even if it's inanimate, like a fire, for example. They don't know what to do with the fire, so they find it very powerful, so they worship the fire. Okay, so whatever, a big animal that they cannot defeat, they worship so that they can get favor, or the animal would not eat them, something like that. No, so these are the thinking of the primitive people. So when they build, of course, as I mentioned, it's like a trial by error, or I mean trial and error, and so they were able to come up with a windbreak to protect themselves. Um, they don't stay in caves because they keep on roaming around. They keep on hunting. Okay, it was only much later, when during the agricultural period, when people started to stay put, and so they started with the caves maybe, but then they wanted something more stable, so they started building houses and then communities. Oops, sorry. Um, okay, so it says here that Negritos of northern Luzon and Dumagats of northeastern Luzon had these three kinds of habitation: a windshield. The one we saw earlier is a windshield, a low unwalled shed, and then an imitation Filipino house. I really don't know what an imitation Filipino house is. But there is a priest in SVD who's an architect also, Winan Klassen. He wrote the book, which is, I think, the book that you're still using in your history classes, no? Which is the history of architecture. So he also wrote a book, History of the Philippines. It's not as popular as the History of Architecture book, but I got this from him. Um, so in Visayas, Negritos built a hut, which is a combination of two windscreen. So two windscreen combined made a hut, no? And then I could not really find a picture of what they call the dait-dait, which is the type of dwelling of the Mamanwa tribe of northeastern Mindanao. So part two is about the vernacular architecture. So we have very little to study about um, primitive architecture, no? But it's good to know that we are also very, very old, at least our race. Um, Now, vernacular architecture is a type of architecture where building tradesmen are used for construction. So we already have skilled labor, okay? So unlike in the primitive, so it's like anybody who can who can use a hammer or stone, whatever, no, who can move. So it's also a type of architecture where adjustments are made on an existing model to a particular need, resulting in variations to the original. and a type of architecture which has a capacity for receiving and expressing meanings, which are the beliefs, values, and aspirations of a culture. So it's difficult for, in the Philippines at least, to do away with what we call animism, the belief. There is always that. And even when other cultures try to, when we try to assimilate other cultures, we still have that, no? Even when the Chinese came, so we are immediately attracted to Chinese beliefs. When the Spaniards came, we're immediately attracted to Spanish traditions, Spanish beliefs, no? Um, and then the same with the Americans. So we easily embrace whatever is the superstitious belief of these other countries. So I guess that's very much rooted in our culture. So the big difference between a vernacular architecture and a primitive architecture, the vernacular architecture, you already have people who know how to build, although they are not professionals, they are not schooled. So they learn only by watching, observing. And this is happening even until now. Okay, most of our construction workers, for example, we always have a like a head carpenter, and then he always has a an assistant. So the assistant watches and observes the head, and then after some time, he wants to handle his own project. So he finds a client, so he now becomes the head. It's like that, no? So whatever he learns from his master supposedly, and then whatever he learns also from, I don't know, reading and from other people, so he tries to apply. But he never went to school, okay? Not even a vocational school. So the result of the output of this type of system are the vernacular architecture. So you can almost say that um, if you see something which is really um, well, no, sloppy, because it's like they never went to school. Of course, they never did. So you can say, okay, this is done in a vernacular way. You can say that, no. You can say it like in a positive way. Sometimes you can even refer to it negatively. So people who did not go to school, because it depends on the workmanship, no, if it's very sloppy. So the individual dwelling unit is the most common building type, because so very seldom they engage in a commercial building, because that's more high tech for the common worker, no? And then mostly have the of the houses are like the floating volume raised on stilts, which is what we call the bahay kubo. So it's the easiest type of house. So like anyone who has learned a little skill in carpentry can make bahay kubo. I don't know about you. Do you have skills in carpentry? So in the northern Luzon, northern Philippines, the best example of a vernacular architecture is the Ifugao house. Now you might say, sir, mura manigitun-an og maayo, because it's very refined. Okay, so of course, eventually after so many years, they refine what they create. But when they started doing this, of course, it looks very sloppy, and then they just keep on improving. Now, the Ifuga house was said to be inspired by the four-legged granary. No? So these are storage for rice. So because of course food is very important for the Filipinos, and we are visited by typhoons. So we have to make sure that and then there's also that part where half the year is wet, half the year is dry, or there's a season. There's a wet season, there's a dry season. So when during the wet season, you have to prepare the food, because during the dry season, there's no harvest. So we adjust, and then even our architecture adjusts to that. Um, so what we ended up with is like a storage for rice and other food. But then it has to be protected not only from the elements, from the storm. That's why you have a very thick and wide roof, you also have to protect them from insects, from animals, so you have to raise them. And if you notice that just below the floor, the posts have discs, disc, like separating the post from the floor. So those discs are supposed to protect, to ward off rats. So in principle, the rats cannot go up because um, they'll have to climb. They have to I forgot the term, to navigate that disc upside down so they fall. So that's the idea. And then we even have that in the boats. If you have a rope, and you might notice that along the rope there's a disc. Okay, that's to prevent the rats from going to the boat using that rope. No? So when they encounter the disc, so they cannot go beyond that. Beyond that. This is what I mentioned about very technical things. So at least what I wanted to show you, to make you realize is that a lot of research has been done to understand how our ancestors, or the old, not even the not too old, are building their houses, and then how they call the parts of the houses, like in this one. It's good for you to know also how they're called in the vernacular, because when you want to engage in construction, you will have to be dealing with people who did not go to school. And so, in order for you to understand them, you have to speak their language, and they talk about this. No? Just recently, for example, I'm helping out my parents in well, it's a family construction, and then I have to talk to the worker, and he seems to know what to do, except that he's using some terms which has a different meaning to me, but of course he understands it fully. Like for example, if I was describing a I was describing what do you call grill work, no? Okay, so I want this veranda to be enclosed in grills, that. So even joke that it will look like a prison. So, but then the term that he used is railing. Of course, as far as we know, the railing is just like 90 cm, so that you can hold on to it, you don't fall. But that's the term that he used, and for a while, okay, if you don't get the nuance of it, so you get confused, no? And so he's been using a lot of terms. Well, that's even English, and then like deconstructed. No? But then there are also really Visayan terms, or the local terms that sometimes I don't understand. I have to tell him, no? What is that? Because I really don't know. I will have to laugh, no? Because I'm sure that he also laughed. Floor details. Uh, I will share the slides with you so that you can actually just study them if you want. Someone raised the hand. Who was that? See. I cannot. Someone asking a question. Okay, just unmute yourselves if you want to call my attention. Um, where were we? So, structured. So in the southern Luzon, we have these types of houses: the Bukod, Banawe, Baoko, Bontok, and the Sagada. So let's try to talk about each of them, starting with Baoko. So it says here that there are two ridge posts rise higher, creating triangular openings. It's referring to this one here on top, no? So you have an opening because the sides. So the section you see here is the section longitudinal section. So you have like a ventilation on the roof, and then it introduces the attic because of the high roof. Um, the Bontok house, I'm sorry. So this bontok house adds to the boko by extending the roof downwards so that the space down can be used. Okay, it's like part of the house. Okay, but they're open. But then since it's shaded, so you can use them somehow. The wooden chamber above the attic became a granary. In the Sagrada house, you put walls. You also have the very extended house down to almost level to the ground. Then you put walls, so you end up with what we call a house within a house. Okay, so that's the and then the reason why they really closed everything is because of the harsh climates. So maybe the typhoons are stronger in this part of the region. The Bokod house, well, apparently this is not affected so much by the typhoon because it looks so small. Unfortunately, I cannot get a good pic. I cannot find a picture of a Bokod house. Okay, but this is like the typical bahay kubo that we see. In the northern Luzon, there's the Isneg house and the Kalinga house. The Isneg house has a like a Gothic like arch for the roof. So the picture here is not so good because it does not show the side. But I again had difficulty looking for a picture. The Kalinga house is more for the rich, and then it is octagonal in plan, and it's also like a house within a house. But this is a more refined version of the house. The previous one is the more um, primitive, but it looks like it's either as refined as this one on the left, or it can be as simple as the one on the right. Okay. Now in the Visayas, there's a marked difference between how people build houses in the northern part of the Philippines from the lowland houses. Or actually, this is not only the Visayas, no. Northern meaning on the mountains and then lowlands. So the mountains, especially in Luzon, so the posts go only up to uh, the floor. So it's like the whole house is placed on posts. But then for the lowland houses, the posts go out all the way up to the roof. And then in joining these structural members, in the northern houses, they use mortise and tenon. I hope you're familiar with this in your building tech. And but then the lowland houses, they tie the members using rattan. So what we call the slashing or the lashing, sorry, the lashing. The floor joists rest directly on girders. In the lowland, there is a beam between the floor joists and the girders. And finally, the wood surface in northern houses are dressed, meaning they're really shaped and then made smooth. Um, but in the lowland, they're not dressed, so they're kept uh, as is. Maybe there's just they're cleaned up a little. Okay, so all they did, and this is something that you might encounter if you go into conservation and you end up studying. If you go to the Jesuit house, for example, or the Casa Gorordo, or some old houses there in Cebu, you'll notice that the posts are really like three trunks. No? They're just cut off and then placed there. So it's not shaped into cylindrical, perfectly cylindrical shape. So you can see that it's wavering. So all they do, even if they're used horizontally, all they do is they just find where another structural member will be placed and make sure that they're level. So they just make a notch that makes the two leveled. But then all the rest are just um, um, not straight. So this is the typical, well, the author called it the Cebuano house, but it's also very typical in Manila and even in uh, in Mindanao. But I guess it originated mainly in the Visayas. It's raised from the ground. The space below is used for animals. Then entered through a ladder, the sala and kitchen as main spaces inside. Um, and then entry leads to a sala or through a porch, and then the walls are made of bamboo, nipa, or sawali, or what we call the I forgot. So these are terms. They're very badly scanned, but you don't need to memorize them for this course. Maybe for your archist, you need to memorize them. Uh, and then what I only wanted to show you is how much research has been done to even come up with all of this data. No? How you might laugh at, for example, to the idea that this is being done in the mountains. No? And you might have been watching, you might even know how to do this yourselves, but then you will not realize that this is actually placed in a textbook, and modern people are trying to understand how this is done so that they can do it themselves if they have to recreate an old vernacular uh, residence. Okay, so I will not explain those. So the Visayan settlement had three patterns. It's lining the street, or they're encircling a school, or the houses are in clusters. Okay. So they're never coalesced, meaning to say they're not joined together and form into one uh, big building. So there are a lot of beliefs associated with house construction in the Visayas, and I'm sure that for some of you, you are very familiar with this. For example, the spirit which owned a particular site must be appeased. So sometimes you need to build near a very big tree, which they say is puyan, no? Puyan, which means that spirits live there. So therefore, you have to ask, you have to say tabi tabi or something. Even if you, for guys, no, who wants to pee anywhere and then he finds a tree, and then before you pee, you say tabi tabi. Okay, so it is important to start house construction during a propitious month. So you have to observe the behavior of the moon. If the moon is rising to full moon, that's the best part, but it's waning towards a new moon. That's not a good part. That much I know from my mother. No? The stair or ladder steps should not be divisible by three. This is the oro plata mata. So if the step um, happens to be on the mata, so it's malas, so you have to add another step. The main door must face east. Even until now, people are saying, okay, architect, just change the door, make it face east because it's facing south or something, whatever. But then if you cannot avoid that, they also have all of these ways to deal with it, like putting a waving cat or something, um, a water feature. But I have not studied feng shui, so I'm sorry I cannot share so much. No? So dropping items in the hole of the first post. Although we do that also like time uh, capsule, okay, but maybe that's the modern excuse for doing something which is supposed to be an animist uh, culture, no? Practice. Offering of fresh animal blood during blessing and marking rooms with crosses made from the blood. So I have never encountered these marking rooms with crosses made from the blood, but I have, of course, a lot of um, I've witnessed a lot of this killing of animal just so to use the blood for offering, and it's part of number one, no, which is to appease the spirit, probably uh, staying in that site. So it's really up to you whether you believe it or not. But what's important is that it is up to the client. If they truly believe this, then well, you cannot do anything. It's part of the program, architecture program now. So the Muslim, since they are uh, like the they're not the majority actually in Mindanao, but they are there ahead first, I think. Okay, so most of the primitive houses in Mindanao area uh, are uh, are influenced, no, or influenced by Muslim tradition. I just realized after reviewing my slides that I was not able uh, to find very good pictures of Muslim houses. Okay, but then the principal houses are the sleeping area, which they call bilik. They have porch, they have kitchen. There's no ceiling. There's always 9 house posts named after parts of the body. The walls leave a half-meter gap at the top for ventilation, and then the porches and doorways are adorned with carved ukil designs. And finally, exterior roof decorations have the tajuk pasong and sanipa, which we will see later on. Okay, so you build the house with the central post first, and then you go diagonal to get letter C and B, and then the other diagonal to get letter D and E, and then you form the cross, no, to get the F, G, and H, I, and then you have the 9 posts when to complete the building. So these are again some of the research done on how they are constructed and what are the names of those parts. So I don't need to memorize them because there's always the notes, no? And then there's always Google if I really need. But then when you go to the mountains, of course, you have to refresh your memory first. You have to study because there's no Google in the mountain if there's no signal, even with Dito. Okay. Um, Here, so this is the most characteristic part of the Muslim house. They carve some of the ends of structural members, even the ends of some girders or floor joists are carved at the end. So it's very ornate, and most of the uh, seams are animals or um, floral pattern or geometric also. This is settlement, which is not important for us. So for the Muslims to make the house, you have to follow the procreation process of the human body. The one that I showed you earlier, um, the sequence was supposed to be that procreation process, but I actually don't understand how that becomes procreation process. No, but if you want to go deeper into that, so you're welcome to look it up. They have a local imam or like an elderly or a priest that they have to consult, no? Whether the house uh, will be lucky on that site. No? And then there's also the good and bad months for construction. I don't know if they also depend on the moon. After construction, gantung or hanging one of unhusked rice and water are suspended at the center of the king post. Probably it's an offering or to ward off evil spirits. I don't know. So these are just examples. So we now come to the meat of the presentation, which is the Spanish colonization, the architecture during the Spanish colonization. Now, some of you, well, Lantawan is now available online through ISMIS. Now, I wrote there an article which you can read to understand more about the development of towns in Cebu. And then there's also an article written by architect Van G. Ulila about the Chinese influence in the architecture in the Philippines, which is part of our topic next meeting. And then architect Rani also wrote about how the urban patterns in Cebu developed. He used some of the maps that I created. And then my professor in Japan wrote about Intramuros, which we will also mention later, so the development of Intramuros. So there's a lot of very interesting articles to read there. So I hope that you will take time to read. So you um, stop mobile games for some time and read. No? Um, I will not talk about the history of Magellan because everyone's talking about it now, especially it's a 500-year anniversary. So I will spare you because these are the maps that you probably saw where Magellan went, what is the trading around the world during the time that explains why he is going all around, and then how he follows Christopher Columbus, and there he is, and then this is his route. So from Spain, he went to South America and then crossed the entire Pacific, so entire Pacific Ocean, no? And only to end up in the Philippines and get harassed by Lapu-Lapu and his henchmen. And so they escaped to go to Borneo and then Africa and then back to Spain. Okay, and then take two, no? So who followed him is this guy, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, uh, who managed to make a settlement in the community. Mm, okay, okay, wait. So, the first capital was Manila because although they landed in the Visayas and in Cebu, the Visayans were very, at least Cebu is very hostile. They they went to Panay, but then they found Manila more suited as a capital. So they built cities, which they call ciudades, and small towns, which they call villas, and then they assign a head town, which they call the cabaceras or the poblaciones. So the poblacion is still what we have here. Now, this is so even in Cebu, what is important about the old um, business district with the city hall there and a lot of other uh, buildings is that some of the street actually still belong to the old street patterns when the city was founded or was developed. Okay, some of the streets, of course, it's now wider, it's now cemented, but that's the same street. Okay, so I'm talking about Magallanes, Colon, even that part along the Plaza Independencia. So some of them remains, and this is something that can still be preserved. And I don't know, like uh, one part of the information campaign. This is the Manila plan, but instead of discussing this, I will ask you to just read the article of architect Juan Ramon Jimenez. He's a Spaniard from Sevilla, and then he is teaching in the University of Shiga Prefecture, where I took my doctorate, no, in Japan. And so we will skip a lot of this. Uh, the plan for Manila is now the Manila, the city used to be just the intramuros, so it's walled and it's designed by the Spaniards. But the extension all around it are now this one is still part Spaniard extension, but much later it was Burnham who really planned, no? And when Burnham planned it, it's all designed geometrically. Okay, so again, that is an urban form that still remains even until now, no? And which can be preserved. And there are actually some people who are doing that. Now, inside Intramuros, there are 7 churches. Some of them are already uh, non-existent. Um, One that is existing is actually the Manila Cathedral. But if you've been there or you've seen picture of the Manila Cathedral now, that's not actually how it looked before. So there's a lot of change already because the Manila Cathedral was destroyed like one, two, three, four times or five times. No, so it's damaged by a typhoon, destroyed by an earthquake, destroyed by earthquake again, 1645, and then um, I think it was partly bombed, during the war. So this is an old picture of the Manila Cathedral. This is Manila Cathedral plan before and after. And then this is how it looks like in one after an earthquake, I think. And then this is how it looks like now. So if you notice that the belfry is less ornate and higher, and so is this. But then the person who designed this is also a well-known architect. No? Another church is San Agustin, which is now well preserved. This one, if you notice that this one was totally damaged, they decided not to rebuild that anymore. So you have here like it's not balanced anymore, but still people go there, and then the inside is well preserved also. San Ignacio Church, which is no longer existing, also the Lourdes Church, Church of the Recoletos, and San Francisco. The Church of the Recoletos, I think they're trying to make a replica, but only of the facade. So it's weird. Santo Domingo is no longer existing in Intramuros, but it is existing somewhere else. I think this is how it looked in Intramuros, or this is now the other version. Okay, so it's very Gothic inspired. So the best way to discuss the architectural style of the churches of that time is to relate them to the religious orders responsible for the church construction. Okay, so we cannot deny that when the Spaniards came, they bring along also the Catholic faith. And of course, the bearers of those are the friars. And during the time, the medieval period, so you have different religious organizations starting to flourish. And so they're trying to help each other out in their mission of evangelization. So you have the Augustinians, the Dominicans, Franciscans, Jesuits, Augustinian Recollects, and then of course secular, which is not a religious order. But then the other column you see here are the churches that they built. Okay, some may be familiar to you, like Tondo or the what? What is familiar to you? I don't know. For me, San Sebastian is the well known because it's made of steel. It's Gothic and made of steel. So let's go fast on the Augustinian Church. We just want to see how they look like. We do not really need to know a lot about the history and a lot about how they're constructed technically. So this is the Remedios Church in Malate. It's not really very small, but it's small compared to other churches. No, it's still there. It's very quaint. This is the Tondo Church, the Pawai Church. Okay, so this is a World Heritage site. Okay, so if this has to be repaired, UNESCO has to come in. Okay, and they have to bring in foreigners, experts. So some of my professors, for example, in Japan, have been involved in this project. And so the Dominicans, they built the Binondo Church. This one is in Batanes. Batanes is at the northernmost of the Philippines, so there are some islands there, and nearly all the typhoon visits the place, visit the place. No, so that's why it has to be made really sturdy like this, and we don't have so many openings because of to protect the inside, from the typhoons. In Cagayan province, and then in Isabela. Um, so here, uh, what might have been the old version is similar to the belfry. This is covered with plaster. So because the brick is like your hollow blocks and then you plaster it. Okay, but later on, people see the bricks to be very romantic or very uh, aesthetically pleasing. So that's why they would prefer to see the bricks instead of having it plastered. But the plaster is supposed to protect the brick, so that's why there are a lot of issues now, a lot of debate on whether to really go back to the old one where the the main reason why it's plastered is because it's supposed to protect the bricks from deteriorating, or you just show it bare like that, slowly deteriorating because people find the deteriorating building more more heritage looking. Okay, um, Nueva Vizcaya, Calasiao Church in Bangkasinan. I think we're still in Dominicans, no? As Dominican churches. So sometimes when you examine an old church and you can identify them by the insignias that they leave behind. If you see this insignia, so you can say that, okay, so this church was at least handled by the Dominicans before, even if they are now administered by another religious order. Okay, because the Dominicans left their mark and they left it like a permanent mark, no, on stone. So Franciscan churches, um, the Santa Ana Church. I used to work for a company called Escuela Taller de Filipinas Foundation Incorporated. We train out of school youth to construction techniques which are used in the building of old houses and old churches. So, for example, how to use limestone instead of hollow blocks. So to learn how to do that, to carve the limestone to this type of uh, moldings, well, to make those windows with copy shells, etc. So the old traditional construction methods. That's what we teach them. So right now, the Escuela Taller is working on this. They finished the door and also the inside, and so now they're working on the outside. So the G1 Church in Eastern Samar, it was just recently rehabilitated after the Yolanda typhoon. Church in Tanay, Rizal, Church in Marilao, Bulacan, Tayabas, Quezon. So you have to be familiar later on if you go into heritage. So these are the what you would expect, no? What to expect, by. And the Jesuits, they have few, and they're not too ornate, and then they have this insignia. In the Jesuit house that I showed you last time, I showed you an insignia, no? That uh, but the one I showed you actually just shows the 1730 and then the JH, and then there's another medallion actually in the gate with this insignia. That's why it's identified with the Jesuits. And for Augustinian Recollects, this is the most famous of them. This is San Sebastian Church. It's all made up of steel, bakal, no? Um, if you haven't been there, really, it's one of the places that you should go to. Um, I cannot confirm whether it was Eiffel, the one who built Eiffel Tower, who's also part of the projects in making this. Okay. But right now they're trying to conserve this because if the wood gets rotten, steel gets rusted. And after examining the insides, because normally the sections are hollow, but then when they have cameras look into the inside of the section, so they notice a lot of rusting, which are really very difficult now to uh, to repair, which will require a lot of money. So Zambales, Palawan, um, and Romblon. So all of this all around the Philippines. And then you also have the secular churches. So if you're not familiar with how the Catholic Church is organized, so you have, say, the Pope and then the priests, the cardinals, the bishops, and the priests, okay? They're not religious, so they are all secular. Then there are those who wanted to seclude themselves because they wanted to just go focus on this mission. It's either prayer or teaching or something. Then they form their own community, so they are the religious. Okay, so these are not the religious. So you have the Quiapo Church, okay, famous during the Black Nazarene, um, I think every January. And then Dumanhog Church in Cebu, um, Ilocos San Agustin Church in Intramuros. And the Spaniards also built schools, okay? Ateneo de Manila, Colegio de San Juan Beltran. And what I'm showing you are the old pictures, so that's not how they look like now. Wait. Okay. Santa Isabel of Manila, Santa Rosa of Mala. So some of these houses, these schools no longer exist. This is a hospital. So we also have Palacios, Cabildos, and the Custom House in Manila. This is the Ayuntamiento building before, then was destroyed, looked like this. Then they rehabilitated it. So now it's fully functional. We normally have trainings held in the Ayuntamiento building. The Custom House before, and now ruins even until now. And so finally in Cebu, development architecture in Cebu. Now instead of discussing this, I will ask you to read the article of architect Trani, who discusses how this developed. So we will learn more. But this is what I mentioned to you. So this is now the old Cebu, okay, the old part. So there used to be a stream here or a river all the way. So if in Intramuros, they enclose the city with walls. In here, Legazpi decided to do away with the walls because there's the river that is supposed to protect the city. So that river must have really been wide. No, in fact, at some point, um, Parian is on the top here, okay, because the Spaniards wanted to segregate the community into races. So the Chinese are on the north, and then on the west are the Filipinos. So outside the river, and inside are the Spaniards and the mestizos. Okay, so some of these streets still belong to the old streets, no, that you can see even from here. Okay, my professor actually, when he talked about, I think this, I don't know whether he talked about this in this article about Intramuros. So he identified all of those streets. If you're a Cebuano, you know San Pedro, and then the cathedral. It used to look like this. It's the belfry is connected to the main church by this, but now they extended the church so that it goes all the way like that. So it lost its original proportion. Some say it's ugly, but then, anyways, it's there. And the convent before, and then they preserved it. They made it into a museum, so it looks like this now. So there's a big difference. Actually, not much difference, I think, except that they added some columns outside to reinforce, no, these columns, but they're made of steel. And Santo Niño Basilica during the 2013 earthquake, so the belfry fell over. So they were able to repair it now. Colegio de San Ildefonso used to be the San Carlos, um, but then it was administered by the Jesuits. That's why we cannot say that this is really partly this part of the history of San Carlos. San Carlos now, and the Church of the Recoletos, which is still uh, there's a in the USJR now. I don't think it's this is still the same church. Parian Church in Cebu, which was demolished because of a conflict between the cathedral and then because this is now in Parian and then most of the Chinese go here and then most of the Chinese were rich. So this is more beautiful than the cathedral. So better get rid. The the controversy is that the cathedral somehow found a way to have this destroyed so that the money that went to this church will go to the cathedral. And part of that, which is this part, which is the convent, became now the fire station in Parian. But then the fire station now doesn't look like this. Um, so it's just fully changed. So like there's no trace of it now anymore. Okay. This is the Plaza Parian. This used to so the triangular island here now has this enormous um, sculpture, which they call the heritage monument. Okay. Um, well, no comment. Residential architecture. This is Casa Gorordo. This is Yap San Diego residence. Notice tiled roof. Um, the first ground floor is made of stone. Second floor is made of wood. The windows here they're made of combination. There's a lattice windows with copy shell and then louvered also. This one doesn't have any window panes. But the Jesuit house, which is much older, is the true Bahay na Bato. No? They call this mestizo, Bahay na mestizo, because it's not Bahay na Bato, because otherwise it should be the ground floor and the upper floor made of stones, which is this one. So this is true Bahay na Bato. Um, we have to change to wood for the ground floor at the second floor because of the earthquakes. So if you have a stone wall which is very high, so the top would normally topple over if it's not well constructed. So it's better to have uh, the top floor made of wood so that the whole house just shakes. And then the colon, which is actually just like 2 blocks in the colon right now. This is the old colon. The Carcel de Cebu, which is now the Cebu Museo Cebu. So if you notice, just this one, they added a second floor and then removed this second floor, and so this is how it looks now. Okay. Okay, this is the last slide. So normally when I give this lecture, I would invite my students to join a one night only activity organized by the Ramon Aboitiz Foundation, which is called the Gabi sa Kabilin. So it's the time that all the museums are open, and then if you get a ticket, you can enter all the museums, okay? But only for one night, so you have to choose a route and then try to enter as many museums as you can. Unfortunately, it's the pandemic, so you cannot go there. And so what they're trying to do now is that they're holding some webinars, but then it's not it's quite different. So they're still adjusting to it. No? So there was no Bahay, I mean, Gabis Kabilin last year, and I don't think there will be any this year. It usually happens in May. Okay, so that's it. So I have a very important announcement. Let me just stop sharing. So very important announcement. Um, First of all, I have prepared some short quizzes based on the previous topics, which I will um, publish after this lecture. And um you can answer those quizzes anytime you want until the next 2 weeks, for the next 2 weeks. But they are time pressured, 10 minutes, only 10 items, but you're allowed to backtrack. But you can only take it once, okay? So if you finish that, you cannot take it again. And second is that um, I wonder if Carl Lumakang is here. Yes, Carl, Daniel, you're here. I've been sending you emails, but you're not replying. I hope you hear me now, because this is something to do with one of the recordings of our lecture that was assigned to you as the owner, and I was asking you to make me the owner of that recording. So you have to go to your Google Drive to look for it, and then change the owner so that I can. That's why I was not able to post a copy of the recording in the Canvas, no, because I cannot access it. And then third is that um, the three classes in AD0251 will have this assignment, common assignment for everyone. You are going to interview. First of all, you're going to work in pairs. So you have to find a partner. Okay. And what you will do is that you will interview a practitioner of heritage conservation. I have already approached them, and then I will provide a list, and then together with that list is their email addresses, and they are now waiting for you to contact them to arrange for the interview. Okay, so what we're going to do is this. I will post the assignment in Google Classroom. Okay, and then in that assignment we have the instruction, and then there is the list which is attached. You go to that list. It's in Google Sheet, and then you will find the name of the practitioner, their email addresses, and then a column on the interviewer, a column for the note taker, and a column for the instructor. So you and your partner will have to agree who will do the interview and who will take down notes. Okay, because someone has to take down notes, even if the practitioner agrees to record the meeting, the interview. Still, you have to take the notes after the interview based on the recording. And who knows, the recording might fail. So therefore, it's good that you still have the notes. Okay. So you have to put your name. You select which one you want to interview. Then you put your name beside that, and also your partner, and then your instructor, because it's the same list for all three classes. Now, our class has the first pick, okay? Because I thought this up, and then I'm the one who's having class now, and so architect Solis will have her class on Monday, so that's the time that she introduced the assignment, and that's the time that they get to pick who they want. But then we already picked our own. And finally, in Wednesday, Architect Ulila will introduce it to her class, and so her class will have the last pick. Okay. Um, so the practitioners range from in well different specialization, and then I took out all the foreigners except for one who is a uh, who is an archaeologist and who is very much involved in many projects in the Philippines. The rest, for example, my professor, I took him out because he's not too involved in many projects in the Philippines. Um, or maybe I should put him back. Anyway, so you select. No? I will be providing the draft of the email that you will send to your to the practitioner that you will interview, and then you just have to change. Of course, you put your names, change it, no. And then I also provide the questions. It's there, and then I will also provide a the guide on how to go about the interview. I might do it in terms of a video or maybe a slide. I don't know, but I will share it after. No? Okay, because uh, you have 2 weeks to do the interview. The output will be a transcript of the interview, or like the um, yeah, transcript of the interview. The recording will serve as the proof that you interviewed. But then, if the if the practitioner does not want to be recorded, so I have also an alternative proof, no, which is like the transcript that you have to send them, that they have to sign digitally or by email. Everything will be through email, and so you have to do a Google Meet with them, the three of you, your partner, and the practitioner. Okay, so the result of this is what we will be discussing. Probably I will compile the result and show it to everyone. Okay, and then we can have some discussion, and then we can probably write a research paper made of it, where everyone will be acknowledged, and which will be authored by the three instructors. Okay, that's it. Do you have any questions? One of those you're supposed to interview has been asking me when is your student going to interview me? I'm so excited. So that same sentiment, no, uh, is brewing in in a lot of these practitioners. So if you don't have any questions, so we'll end this. If you have, you can send me an email or a comment on the post that I will be publishing later. Okay, so thank you very much for your time, for listening to my lecture, and see you next week, Friday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
okay, Carl Daniela, please, you're still there.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, hold